Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below this video, and that's where we pick from each week. Steph wrote them down this week, and there are 25 questions that we picked out from those questions that were asked in last week's video. Holly is out here with me. It's supposed to be 95, 96 today, and so she's walking in the morning, and then she's kind of done for the day. I'll let her stay out here a little while in the early morning, but as soon as she starts panting, she's in the house for the rest of the day. Let's see. Thanks to everybody who bought the weekly garden planner while it was discounted during the month of July, and thanks to everybody who's bought it, period, since it was first introduced. September and October have been shot, and I've started to build those pages out, but they're not linked yet, but they will be in the next few weeks. And there's an ongoing $20 discount that's just down below this video if you're still interested in getting the weekly garden planner. The Learn to Garden video series is going to be $50 off during the month of August, and you can just use the code August. The difference between the two things I'll talk about because there's a question about it later in this question and answer video. But the Learn to Garden video series is definitely getting 3 videos during the month of August. 2 more design videos from Steph and a tool video from me. So those are coming up. 3 videos went up this week. One on crucial garden maintenance is what I called it, but it's just all the some of the maintenance that we're thinking about. Holly, what are you doing, girl? What are you doing? What were you doing over there, huh? Come here. What are you doing over there? What is that? Anyway, she's being strange over here beside a container. There are chipmunks that live under the steps over there. You okay? You okay? Huh? They're chipmunks that live under the steps over there. I think that's what she's smelling over there in that area. But we did a video on maintenance, peak summer heat maintenance out here in the garden, and then a video on magnolias that we shot down at Spartanburg Community College with Kevin Paris. Doesn't have a tremendous amount of views, and I think that video should. If I was ever going to say that there was a video that I thought folks should watch, that would be one. We planted 5 new magnolias over here in the vegetable garden that are going to be magnolias going to the new garden down in Wallace when we start that project next spring. But these are new hybrid magnolias from Kevin, and he tells the story of naming a couple of magnolias in that video. I think it's a neat video. And then one more of the tour videos from this garden. Okay, let's get to some questions. So what to do for a shade garden that's newly exposed to the sun? They had a neighbor remove a bunch of plants, and then so now their shade plants are now in the sun. They put up a shade cloth. What else can they do? Some of the plants will adjust to it more than you think, especially established plants, and you're probably just going to need to find out which ones those are. I don't know where this person lives, and so that it was probably in the question, and I we didn't write it down. But it kind of depends on what the plants are. We have a strange mixture, and it's one thing I was pointing out during the open garden here. There are things out here that are, a full sun thing right next to a shade thing, right next to a part shade thing, right next to but everything is planted so close out here that the roots are shaded. And a lot of times it's more the roots that need the shade than the top of the plant. So I don't know how established that shade garden space you have is. Some things will be far more tolerant than you think. And it's not like full sun is just going to kill them tomorrow. And so for me, I'm probably going to expose it and see what struggles from it and what doesn't. But if anything that starts to struggle or gets burned, or next spring will probably tell you a lot. When their things leaf out, if they struggle at that point, then you're going to have to move. You're going to have to move some things and not move other things. That'll be an interesting exercise, really. But you'll be amazed once something is a little more established and it can shade its own roots and it's a well-mulched area, that some of the shade plants are a little more sun tolerant than you might think. I also wanted to point this out. I had brought this out. I showed the Lego thing over the last couple times from the that I was sent in an email. Someone sent this card to us, and I won't give out people's names here on the channel. But this card's unbelievable. The message in it about they came to the open house, but this thing is all these are layers with the front of the house and the front garden, the path here. Several of the plants represented there. The amelanchier, serviceberry tree in the front garden, even the chimney that doesn't do anything, because this was an old oil heated house, had an oil drum originally. That's what that originally was for. But anyway, unbelievable. I just wanted to point out to the person who sent this how appreciative we were of. This was a lot of hard work to make this card. It's very, very detailed. It's really, really kind of wild. So thank you very much for that. So somebody has they have a fire spike plant that they put in a container, and now it's rooted into the ground. It doesn't really matter what plant this is that was in the container, but you know, what should they do with this when something roots out of the bottom of the container and into the ground? It's totally up to you. I don't have to water a couple of the containers that are in this garden because they're rooted into the ground. We had an azalea that was in a container here for 3 years, and it had rooted into the ground, and I just kind of no longer had to water the container because it had its water coming from underneath the container. Same thing with the golden Oakland holly out in the front. We haven't watered that container in 3 years because the plant's been rooted into the ground. So really you don't have to do anything if you're leaving the plant in the container. Of course, if it's a plant that you need to bring in or protect or something like that, you're gonna have to cut it loose from the ground. And I just wouldn't do both those things at the same time. I'd cut it loose from the ground, but leave it in the container, and then take care of it in the container for a brief period of time before you transplant it out of the container somewhere else. So don't do both. Don't cut it free from the ground and jerk it out of the container at the same time. Maybe give it a moment to put some new roots into that container a bit while you take care of it. But lots of plants do this. That little hole, that's what I've said about 2 reasons I want to elevate the containers off the ground. And as I look around, I don't have a single container elevated off the ground, but normally we do. 2 reasons. One is those containers being in contact with the ground are a place where slugs and snails tend to hide underneath them. If you ever pick up one of your lean one of your containers over, you'll see that that's the place they're hiding. And number 2, I don't really want the plants to root into the ground like that, but ultimately it doesn't matter. And it's a place where that plant can find water and resources. Sometimes that root can plug up the hole of the container though, and then the container starts to fill up with water when it does get a lot of rain in it. So it can be potentially detrimental to the plant long term once it completely plugs that hole up. Okay. Somebody said, is there a perennial coleus? And this is kind of interesting because coleus is they are perennials. Most of one thing you can kind of figure out from the plants that you're planting in your garden year to year, there's a lot of things we use as annuals are actually perennial plants. They're just not perennial in your area. So as an example of that, all your pepper plants are perennial plants. They're just not perennial in zone 6. The first hard freeze typically kills them. So they're tropical perennials. How can you tell? Well, they get woody down at the bottom. You can see if a plant gets kind of woody right down near the base, that's a perennial in all likelihood somewhere. It wouldn't take all that time and energy to make a woody stem if it wasn't perennial. And so your true annuals, typically, you'll just see it's like green stems all the way to the ground, the entire season. Whereas plants that kind of become woody at the base, you can kind of look at it and go, well, that thing's a perennial somewhere. So coleus are perennials. They're just not perennial for most of us in our ornamental gardens and areas where we get real winter or some winter cold. But the way you can deal with your coleus is to root them and then bring them inside, or transplant them into a container and bring them inside. I will say, you're gonna get mealybugs and several problems during the winter time, but if you can, nurse them, because they don't like that low light in the house. And the dry air, we run our heat all winter, and the air is super dry. It's super dry, and there's never enough light. So if you have some sort of, screened-in porch or glassed-in porch or something like that, where it's not necessarily exposed to the heat inside, that would be better. but they can be overwintered in the house. That's what I'm saying. They're perennial anyway. They're just not perennial with our temperatures. Let's see. Crepe myrtle suckers. I get so many crepe myrtle suckering questions. You know, a lot of the top pruning we do on crepe myrtles, or the planting that we do under them, or disturbances around the roots. They end up suckering along the roots. This person wanted to know if they could spray them. You definitely can't spray them because those are attached to the roots of your tree. So any killing of those suckers you do is going to damage your tree in some way. You can, if you have like one root or two roots where suckers just keep coming up, you can in the wintertime make an attempt to cut that single root out and hope that takes it out. But you want to do that in the wintertime when the tree is dormant and it would have time to recover a bit in the late winter, early spring from root pruning it, basically. And I think there's another question about root pruning coming up. But you could, if it's just like one or two roots that have all the suckers on them, just remove it, but do it when it's dormant. But again, don't spray them. And I'll just chop them off with a shovel and keep moving, keep walking. Something starts to drive me crazy enough that I'm just constantly battling it though, it's gone. Somebody bought a Japanese maple, overwintered it in a container in Zone 5 in Canada. It leafed out only at the base. It looks bad. How should they help it? If it truly leafed out all the way down at the base, most Japanese maples are grafted. So my Tamukiyama Japanese maple back here, the contorted one, is grafted to another Japanese maple. So if the foliage is all the way down at the bottom, that's not the Japanese maple you purchased. It's the one that it was grafted onto. It's a different rootstock, typically. There are some seedling Japanese maples out on the market, but not many. Most of the seedling Japanese maples are grown to become the rootstock for the fancier named cultivars and varieties of Japanese maples. So if it's, again, figure out where it was grafted, and if the growth is below that, it's actually just a different tree, and it's not the tree you actually purchased. And that's why it looks different than what you purchased. But that's the reason I wrote that question down, or told Stuff to write that question down, is because I'm thinking what it is it's not the Japanese maple you actually bought that you're actually seeing. And what happened is it died back to the graft, but the roots were still hardy on it. So you're seeing root suckering, basically, like I talked about with the Japanese maple. So here, somebody bought a red crepe myrtle, has two main leaders, have white blooms, and other branches have red blooms. Is it bicolor, or should they do something about it? I think if you examined it a little closer, you'd find that you have one trunk that's just white on it. A lot of the, it's really, really easy to mix these things up in a nursery setting. I rooted tens of thousands of crepe myrtles over the years. We always put one in a container, and then we would grow them out, cut them off, and create our multi-trunks from that operation. But that takes like a year to create a multi-trunk tree. So to shortcut that, a lot of growers now will just stick 3 crepe myrtles in the container. And so if I put 3 rooted cuttings in the container, that tripled the amount of chance I had at making a mistake putting 2 different crepe myrtles in the same container. Because when they're rooted cuttings in the greenhouse, I'm just taking a piece like off this Weigela here. I'm just gonna root a piece this big, right? And so as a crepe myrtle, if all my crepe myrtles are only that tall in the rooted cuttings, it would be really easy to mix them up if I had a tray that didn't have a tag on it and then I made a guess or whatever. I mean, it just happens. They get mixed up. May have been mixed up when they were taking the cuttings out in the field. They took some cuttings off of white Natchez while they were trying to get Muskogee cuttings or Red Rocket cuttings or whatever it was. And then one ended up in the container like that. So I don't think I guess anything is possible. It was kind of funny with red crepe myrtles. They don't ship in the trucks very well. They lose their color really quickly. And anybody who has received them from a grower or has grown red crepe myrtles knows this. I can put red crepe myrtles in the truck on an evening, and then I would take them over to the farmer's market and taking them out of the vehicle. And just that brief period of time that I had taken the sun away from them, the flowers would be either pink or whitish pink. And it looked like the crepe myrtle had 2 different colors on it. And people were buying them for that reason. And I was literally telling them, no, it's not, it's a red crepe myrtle. I just had it in the truck too long. They were buying them just because it looked interesting. It's just a red crepe myrtle. But I think in this case, you probably just have 2 different plants planted in the same container. And that just happens in the nursery business. It's easy to do. It's easy. If you put, you know, all my butterfly bush cuttings all looked alike. Crepe myrtle cuttings looked alike. A lot of these things, when they're this 3 inches tall, it's really hard to differentiate them. And they get mixed up fairly easily. So they bought a house, the previous owner had planted Nandina Domestica. Info says it's invasive. What does this mean? And why would they have planted this? Well, Nandina Domestica has been around in the country forever. You know, it wasn't, I mean, nobody brought these things here thinking that they were going to be bad news. I mean, most of these plants were, a lot of the ones that were considered invasive, like Chinese privet or Japanese privet or even English ivy, or you know, I can look back here in this wooded area and see all the invasive things that were brought to Raleigh, or Elaeagnus, or heck, we have 2 species of Elaeagnus that are invasive in the neighborhood. All kinds of invasives, and I shot videos on all the invasives. The Nandina Domestica is invasive, but man, for all the Nandinas that were planted on virtually every house in this neighborhood 80 years ago, there are very few Nandina Domesticas in the untamed areas of the neighborhood. It's a rare find. It's not, if they were really aggressively invasive, they would be everywhere here, and they're just not. So, you know, I would call them mildly invasive if we were going to call them anything. And this person didn't know when they planted them. The landscaper probably didn't even know. Nobody, I mean, it's not, and again, mildly invasive, and you know, it probably doesn't mean anything. If you like the plants, leave them there. It's not going to actually change anything for you to remove them. I did talk about in last week's video that there are some non-flowering, non-fruiting, because they're non-flowering, non-invasive Nandinas out on the market. And then somebody said, I only buy them for the berries because I think the berries are beautiful. So you're going to get mixed reactions on this. But as we're ranking invasive plants, Nandina Domestica, boys, I don't see it. I mean, there's 1 or 2 here or there around the neighborhood that weren't planted in that spot, and that's it. And if it was super aggressive, and it's not like it's, some of these invasives, you know, if you look at something like Japanese stilt grass is a great example of this, and there's some Japanese stilt grass in the lower area down here below me, outside of this property. Japanese stilt grass will completely cover the ground, and so it takes away our native plant's ability to actually germinate or grow in that low moist area. And there's a lot of plants that like kind of low moist, seasonally moist areas to grow in. And so that's taking away from a native plant. The English ivy that's covering the ground out in that wooded area, definitely doing the exact same thing. It's taking away a native plant's. The 1 or 2 Nandinas that I could find, you know, if we went, you know, 8 blocks from here, are this tall and this narrow, and they're not really taking up a space that, you know, they're taking up a space, but they're not like choking out native things, if that makes any sense. You know, they're not, you know, I have seen like Elaeagnus will just dominate an entire acre. We've got a couple of those spaces right here in this garden, and one I saw not that long ago, close to the Costco that's on Capitol Boulevard. There's a big stand of Elaeagnus where nothing else is going to grow in that wooded space. They've overwhelmed the space. So again, varying degrees of how aggressive a native plant or non-native plant can be, and how it displaces native plants or doesn't displace native plants. It's kind of interesting as well. That was a lot of words for another Nandina question. Okay. Is organic fertilizer what this person should use, and what should they look for? Yeah, I think organic fertilizers, and I've said this many times, are the best way to fertilize our plants, because they feed. It just doesn't break the natural, how fertilizer should work, how nutrients should be delivered to plants. Basically, you're putting down a fertilizer in the form of something that still needs to be broken down, and it can be broken down pretty easily by soil microbes that then can put it in they can make those nutrients usable to the plants and available to the plants when they need them. So basically, it feeds the soil feeds the plants. This is how it's supposed to operate. Okay, that's the synthetic fertilizers are. Man knows better, and we can feed it nitrogen directly, or we can feed it phosphorus directly, and we don't need the soil to do that. And so those are the two different ways, the two different actions that those fertilizers work. Synthetic fertilizers are designed to just kind of bypass the other processes and feed the plant directly. Organic fertilizers are just literally organic materials that you're throwing on the ground, and they still need to be kind of processed by natural activity that happens in that wooded area behind me. How are they surviving without fertilizer? How are they doing it? You know, it's dropping all the material back down on the ground, and then soil microbes and earthworms and beetles and other things are breaking that material down and just refeeding it to the plant. Plus the soil that it's growing in is rock dust, and that rock dust has minerals in it. And so that, you know, it's all doing well without us fertilizing it. Amazing how that works. So again, it's about improving your soil and letting your soil take care of your plants. Okay. So then, and what should I look for? I mean, you see me most of the time use Espoma products out here when I'm once a year fertilizing, like plant tone. And then when we refertilized our annuals this year, I actually had some fish emulsion that I'd had for a couple years that we use on our seedlings inside. And I just mixed the fish emulsion in a wheelbarrow and poured fish emulsion on everything, on all the annuals out here, and it was plenty to take care of it. There are a lot of the bigger companies jumping into the organic game because they want to, you know, they see it as a trend that makes money, and so, you know, you'll see more and more organics. You know, I do question, you know, will a giant corporation that's jumping into the organic game, you know, where are they going to acquire the materials from to make their organic fertilizers? Is it from what type of farms? Most of these are farm waste materials from farming, and, you know, what type of farms are they? Where's this material coming from that makes up their organic fertilizer? I don't know. But I've kind of stuck with Espoma over the years. They don't sponsor me. They don't know me. You know, and then my mid-season fertilization, more typically than not, I'll use a liquid of some kind, and it could be fish emulsion or any kind of liquid organic fertilizer. That's kind of what I look for. I like some of the older companies that have been around doing it for a while, because I feel like they were dedicated to something that when it wasn't the word of the day, right? And so, you know, I don't think there's any shortcuts happening in it. That's just, I may be wrong. So, okay, what is the difference between the two series, the Learn to Garden video series and the Weekly Garden Planner? So the Weekly Garden Planner is literally just, if you've got an established garden, on the first week of July, second week of July, third week of July, these are the things that we're doing in our garden to maintain it. And then, you know, with some adaptability to colder areas or hotter areas or whatever, some conversation in it about that. So it's how to maintain a garden. The Learn to Garden video series is everything from, if you were starting from nothing, how you would design your garden, kind of knowing about yourself a little bit, thinking about yourself a little bit, and what you want to actually maintain, or how big of an effort are you going to put, you know, are you going to go this crazy, or are you just looking for something that's low maintenance? You know, having those discussions. And then again, there's a video all about tools, pruning, pruners, how to, you know, the tools you should have, how to design it, what materials we're using to cover the ground, and just how to build the garden. One is how to build the garden, one is how to maintain the garden, if I had to sum them up. There you go. Somebody has a large hole where they removed a pampas grass. What should the hole be filled with? Topsoil, compost, garden soil. Clay is surrounding the area. I bring this one back around every so often just because I think it's an important thing. I would not fill that hole with some organic material, you know, any kind of compost or anything called topsoil or anything like that, because you're just going to create a low pit where water is going to always kind of stand in that space. If you can, I think it's best to feather the surrounding soil into the bottom of that hole as much as possible. You're still going to ultimately have a little bit of a depression, but I would pull the clay soil that you have in the surrounding area into it and feather it all together. And then if you want to put, if you need at that point to put something else in there, you could use, you know, a bagged topsoil or, you know, I don't know what, you know, topsoil can come from all kinds of different places and that kind of thing. And probably most of the bagged topsoil is going to be a lot of organic material. But if you want to, I wouldn't use those things called garden soil. Any of those bags that are in an endless on sale thing at the box stores would have the fertilizer in them. I don't want any of those kind of products. But again, I try to feather those holes together from as far out as I possibly can, and so that I'm barely dealing with any depression at all. And if I have to fill it at that point, topsoil would be, I guess, what I would use, some sort of, and then a little bit of compost and then mulch on top of that to even it out. But you're always better using your existing soil. Maybe you dig a hole somewhere else in the garden and fill it with that material, you know, if you have to do some digging somewhere else, but use your existing soil to fill the holes. She's doing so good, I'm gonna leave her here. I think she likes the coolness of the stones in the patio, but as long as she's not panting, then I'll leave her out here because this is where she wants to be for sure. So somebody planted Aliums in 8B, South Carolina. They got no flowers this year. They planted them in the correct depth. They're in the full sun. They used some bulb fertilizer, which you probably don't even need to do really that first year, because the bulb comes with kind of everything it needs already from where it was in the ground before it went to sleep. It already has everything it needs for that year. You don't really need bulb fertilizer for that first year. So, not saying it's bad that you did it, I'm just saying that you shouldn't need it on a bulb the first year. Okay. You know, Aliums are typically hardy in zone 3 to 9, and so being in 8B South Carolina, you may not have gotten enough cold on them. You know, they need some chill hours. The Aliums need less than some tulips and a few other bulbs, but they still need some cool nights. The soil to be cooler during the winter time, and you're just right on the edge of whether most Aliums are going to get enough cold on them during the winter time. It could be that they didn't get enough chill hours, at which point if you were planting them in the future, you could put them in the refrigerator for a little while before you plant them. Doesn't necessarily mean they'll bloom the second year, but they'll definitely bloom that first year that you put them in the ground. The other thing that could happen is it's just the first year it was in the ground and they were slightly smaller than they needed to be to flower that first year. We've had a few Aliums out here in this garden that would be the latter, which would, you know, they didn't flower the first year, and the second year they were fantastic. So I'd leave them there, give them time, and see what happens. But again, it could be that you're not getting enough cold to actually do Aliums, and you don't, you know, that's okay. You got other things you can grow. Heck, in 8B South Carolina, you can grow agapanthus, which have similar flower clusters on them, just bloom later in the season. So you got something that the people in zone 4 can't do with the Aliums, right? That can grow the Aliums. So somebody asked, is it a good time to root prune for transplanting? They have a sunshine ligustrum they want to move later in the season. Yes. And that's the kind of thing that's in the weekly garden planner is, you know, in fact, I think it is in August when I remember editing it, I said, this would be a good time to go out and root prune plants that you want to move later in the winter. What root pruning is just you cut the roots, but leave the plant exactly where it is in the ground. So and I would do it toward the end of August. So not early August when it's still this hot outside. You know, I'm filming this, I guess it's the morning of the 3rd or whatever. Probably not the best time, but toward the very end of the month as the days have gotten a little bit shorter, yeah, I would absolutely prune them, the roots on them, and then move them in the when it's dormant later in the winter. So somebody asked for a 3 to 4 foot ornamental grass for the shade. Noticed that most grasses are for sun, and that's true. There are some slightly more aggressive carex, and carex aren't technically grasses, they're just grass-like plants. There are a lot of plants that are not technically grasses, but kind of look like grasses, but there are some taller growing carex that you could grow. And there's a couple of ornamental grasses that are a little bit more shade tolerant. What I would recommend, the Plant Delight's website is pretty good about those kinds of things. And I think you can Google grasses for shady spaces, and I think Plant Delights would come right to the top of the list. And they have the grass-like plants and a couple grasses that actually will tolerate some more shade. But you are correct. Most grasses, I mean, think about it. Most, the grasses grow out in the plains and open spaces, and don't really evolve, with trees all that much. But the carexes do evolve in forest areas and in water, and all over the world. There's like 3,000 species. So to narrow down carex it would be impossible. Some of them will take dry shade, some of them moist shade, some of them taller, some of them shorter. But I think you'd find a carex that would give you some height. Okay. So somebody said regarding soil buildup over time, because the question last week was, did the mulch raise the soil over time? And I was like, yeah, but it just takes forever for that to happen. Tiny, tiny, tiny bit over 20 years at my old house. Does the level decrease as the plants convert organic matter in the soil to plant tissue? That's also going to be a very small amount, the other direction too, of it taking materials from the ground and turning it into plant tissue. Believe it or not, most plants are 90% water. Like I think humans are like 70-some% water, and I may be wrong about that. Like animals are 70-some% water, I think, for the most part. These plants are 90% water. The vast majority of them are. And so if you squeeze them down, all this structure that you see out here, if you squeezed it down and squeezed all the water out of it, there'll be very little actual non-water material that would be left. And so yes and no, right? It's going to use a little bit of material to build the structure of this thing, but for the vast majority of it, it's just water. So not a lot. Okay. How do we keep invasives from the woods and the neighbors from coming into our landscape? Unfortunately, you just can't. If it's, I've got several things that come from every direction here. That's got Bermuda grass over there, creeping Charlie over there, ivy in the back, and that's just to name a few. And then, of course, I've shown in the videos ligustrum and all the other things that we get just constantly germinating out here. There's nothing you can do about them. The main thing you can do is to make sure that you've got a good mulched surface, that you're refreshing your mulch often enough that it's not easy for those things to germinate and come up in your garden. But you're still going to get them. And that's the real nightmare of this, is I got all the invasive plants plus some aggressive natives, very aggressive natives back here, including a cherry that just seeds itself like crazy in here. And then red buds, dogwoods. I mean, some of our native trees are very good at making seed as well. But the non-native invasives are just always going to be an issue out here. But I have less of them than I would if I wasn't capping the ground off all the time and keeping them pulled. So I'm not allowing them to produce more seed in our garden. Okay, let's see. Okay, so somebody's in 7B, zone 7B8, I guess, right here, similar area to mine. Wants a 20-foot tree to keep neighbors from seeing them while they're in their pool. Does not want a hedge or palms. It's kind of funny. Doesn't want a hedge or palms. Well, see, I just use this mixed border, and I have a video about mixed border screens, but the reason I had Steph write this down was because people would come into the farmer's market and they just everybody wants screening plants. And so that was, I would say, a third of all the customers you're gonna get in, that are looking for plants or looking for screening plants. And I would always start off by, what are you trying to hide? It would just catch them off guard. No, it's the neighbor. We're trying to hide the neighbor. And, but that was always my joke to start with, was, what are you trying to hide? And then, so anyway, this person's trying to hide the fact that they're maybe swimming with no clothes on. I don't know, maybe. But they don't want to hedge or palms. Well, I mean, in zone 7B or 8A, you have access to, you know, dozens and dozens and dozens of leafy evergreens from, you know, hollies and Aliums and osmanthus and loropetalum and Chinese snowball viburnum and podocarpus and clayera and another Alium down there and a evergreen viburnum over here, and so many things that you have access to. And so, you know, I think if you went to any garden center and just told them that you wanted kind of a collection of leafy evergreen screening plants, so that you didn't want like the same thing all the way down, they could figure out some grouping of plants. Shindo viburnum makes a great screening plant, 7B, 8A. If it's shady, there'd be a different set of plants like camellias and other things. But you have access to just tons of things that will get in that 20-foot range. And just tell them you want something that grows moderately fast, but you're not looking to make a wall of the same thing. They'll have 20 different items that will get that tall that are leafy evergreen things. And that's what I've always talked about screening. It's just mix it up. That way, if something comes along and causes a problem to one of these plants, I won't lose that entire border over there. Somebody has native hibiscus and they're big, 6 foot tall, 6 foot wide plants. They're too large for the space they're in. When can they divide them? And then they put spring ? So I think if you Googled this, you'd find 2 different answers. A lot of our perennials can be divided as they're fading in the fall, while you can still see them, and you can dig them out and divide them at that time. Equally as good a time would be in the early spring, as they were emerging in the early spring. We're gonna divide some perennials here later this fall, and I planned on making a video about it. But I like to divide most of the perennials in the fall, and that is all of the super hardy ones. And so that would include these hibiscus for me. My agapanthus, as an example, they're barely hard. The ones I have are barely hardy here in my area, and I don't think it'd be a great time to be digging them out. Plus, they don't like winter wet feet. Hibiscus definitely like, you know, moist conditions. But so like, there are things out here, and I'll talk about that in the video, that I probably wouldn't divide. I wouldn't divide my grasses in the fall, agapanthus, a few other things, because when I dig a new hole, that's a place that could potentially stay wet during the winter time. And while those things are dormant, they can't really use water. But things like hostas and daylilies and this hibiscus and some of our other hardy, super hardy perennials, I'm popping them out of the ground and dividing them in the fall while they've faded back, but I can still see where they are. That's kind of when I like to do it. And I feel like they'll put a few more roots on during the winter and come up a little bigger, better, fuller than if I wait till they emerge in the spring and then, you know, stunt them, you know, for that following year by digging them up as they're starting to grow in the spring. Okay. Okay, somebody asked if we will participate in the Great Southeastern Pollinator Census in August. I guess North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, maybe somewhere else is doing a pollinator census during the fall. No, I have not. I can see where I can sign up for it. Our garden would distort this, big time distort this. I mean, as I'm standing here right now, I mean, here's a honeybee, a bumblebee. It's super, super early in the morning. Honeybee. Here's a bumblebee and a honeybee. Another, I don't know what that bee is. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's very early. They're just getting started. 7 bumblebees just right in that span right there that I can count. They're moving, so it's hard to count them. But within the time that I'm shooting this video, which will probably be like a 50-minute video, you know, hundreds will pay a visit to just that little teeny tiny space in the garden, and they're just everywhere out here. I think our garden would actually distort and somehow tell people that we're doing better than we actually are. Let's see. But I love this. This is an unbelievable place for pollinators. And we've gotten a ton of butterflies. We're finally become a place for butterflies. It took me 3 years. I've been disappointed in the number of butterflies we had visiting this garden, and this year, big time butterfly visits. So always takes a little while into the summer. So somebody wants an organic vegetable garden but uses a lawn service that treats the lawn and adds synthetic fertilizer. Can they use the grass clippings on the vegetable garden? Well, you can't call it organic at that point, I wouldn't guess, because imagine they're not just using the fertilizer. I mean, I imagine they're treating it with other things too. I would take the grass clippings and then compost them. And at least you could get, you know, that fertilizer that's in that green grass will help that compost pile, you know, compost things quicker. You need some browns in with those greens, wood chips or whatever, sticks and limbs and things like that. But I think you would probably want to go through some sort of compost process. I don't think you could still even call it organic then, but you'd at least have used up some of that. Hopefully break down some of those chemicals and whatever else. But, you know, for me, you know, I'm not going to be adding lawn clippings to my vegetable garden over there that were treated with 2,4-D or some other or pre-emergent chemicals for weeds or any of that kind of stuff. You know, I wouldn't want it in my vegetable garden. Another thing is about adding the same stuff to your vegetable garden over and over and over again. We had when I did organic lawn care for a couple of years with a guy named Marshall Warren owned the company. He's actually the Johnston County Extension agent now, and he brought the Johnston County Extension group to the garden last year to visit. Now, Marshall's a really great guy, but we would do soil tests for all the areas that any new lawn that we were going to be doing organic lawn care on. We got a soil test and sent it off to the state, and we found some areas in the city where people had just, you know, added the same kind of lime over and over and over again, so their magnesium was off the charts. They had soil problems that were to the point of, you know, I wouldn't have eaten the plant, you know, eaten the vegetables that people were trying to grow in the soil. So, you know, that's one reason to get a soil test, is to make sure nothing's like completely off the chart somewhere where, you know, you could actually the food that you're eating from it could be, have some sort of issue. But it does end up in the food, these things. Okay, what online resources for plants are best for selection, quality, and price? I'm just going to point out, you know, wrote this down because there is a website called Garden Watchdog, and it's on Dave's Garden website. But they have it's called Garden Watchdog, and people put reviews there of mail order companies. And my company, if you want to go on Garden Watchdog, was Earthworks Nursery, and I have 14 reviews on there, and I was batting 1,000. We did a little bit of mail order of trade gallon material from my nursery for about a year, till 2006. I found out that we had closed in 2006 from Garden Watchdog when I looked it up. But you can go, if you're looking at an online mail order plant nursery and you want reviews that are separate from that company, go to Garden Watchdog and look at that. So whatever you're looking at, you can go over there and see what kind of reviews. You can't, don't look at the worst review or the best review of anything. You know, if most of the reviews are mostly positive, it's impossible to ship plants mail order and have everything go right every time. It just is. It's just, you can't decide whether a plant is good or bad from that. You can't decide whether a company's good or bad from that. It's probably how they respond to you when something does go wrong that matters more than, you know, how that first shipping experience went. It's how they treat people after something goes wrong. Somebody's had 18 straight days of rain in North Carolina, and we've had a bunch since. They've actually had a 3-day break from it here, but we were raining. It was a lot. What are the effects on plants in this weather, especially in clay soil? After being so dry for so long, I don't think there's really a whole lot of negative impact unless your plants are actually going underwater. As long as there's time between the rain for the water to kind of get on its way a bit, I don't think there is any problems. And when we're getting thunderstorms this time of year, you'll notice the plants that are still actively growing and haven't gone into a kind of a heat-stressed dormancy. A lot of your plants in your garden are in a dormancy. You know, they did their spring growing, and now they're like, we're done here. Can we get past the 90-degree days already? And then other plants are still exploding with growth. The rain is actually quite good for them because it's usually got some nitrogen in it from the thunder, from the lightning strips nitrogen out of the air and ends up in the rain. And then we see our gardens grow really quickly during these rain events during the summertime. So as long as there's breaks, enough breaks in between, like if it rained 18 straight days and didn't take a break, that's obviously problematic. But if it just rains 18 consecutive days, but it was only 45 minutes of rain here and 2 hours of rain there, probably very little negative impact from that kind of thing. They're able to deal with it in the summertime. They're just not, in the winter time is when these things become really problematic for some plants because they're not using the water and they're just sitting in it. Let's see. So somebody bought perennials down in Georgia and it was just too hot to plant at the time. Now that it isn't so hot or dry, should they go ahead and go in the ground? So this was a mop head hydrangea. You can plant that thing pretty much anytime you want to plant it that you feel like being out there. And then agapanthus was on the list. If you're going to plant that agapanthus, you need to do it sooner than later. Again, I just mentioned agapanthus is one I don't want to fall plant. And so I'd get it in the ground and get it rooted in as fast as possible, you know, before we have winter, if you're going to plant it at all. Otherwise, at some point, you got to make the decision, just overwinter it in the container. But the other things that were on your list were fine. But the agapanthus, I think you're on a clock. You want to get those things in. Again, things that are in a weekly garden planner. Let's see. Okay, so this person said some plants are not doing well, mainly roses and hydrangeas. They thought they were watering adequately, but upon inspection, roots are dry and not spreading out. Does this mean they were planted wrong, as well as not amending the soil enough or whatever? Now, you really do have to water deep. We got to the point, you know, we went that 6 to 10 weeks, whatever it was, without rain here leading up to that open house we had, and we could water for a long period of time and then scratch down 2 or 3 inches, and the water, it was just bone dry. It was really, really hard to get things wet, and there are mature things in this neighborhood that are dead. I mean, mature. I saw a couple mature Japanese maples. I mean, old Japanese maples just dropped dead from the drought that we had. It wasn't even a drought. It was just a period of time with low humidity. It was the worst case scenario for a lot of these Asian plants and southeastern native plants that evolved with humidity and reasonable hot summer temperatures, but not ridiculously hot summer temperatures, you know, and regular rainfall, you know. So we took away the rainfall, the humidity, and then jacked the temperatures from 92 to 102. And these plants are they're going to have problems. They're not evolved for that type of thing. They are in short burst, especially if your garden is, you know, in good shape going into it. But once you get to that 6, 7, 8 week period of time, some plants are really going to struggle with that kind of thing. So when you water, you do have to water much, much deeper than you think. And check after you water. You know, you water for 45 minutes and then, you know, wait an hour after that and then check again. Sometimes it's best to water, let's say you're committed to watering an hour's worth of water. Sometimes it's best to water 30 minutes or 40 minutes and then stop it and then let that soak in a bit and then turn it back on for 20 or 30 minutes. And that second time, the soil's much more receptive to water once it's slightly moist. And so that way you don't get any runoff from the amount of water you're putting on it to try to water a little deeper. Same problems here though, same exact problems where it takes a long time to re-wet that soil too. So even now, after I've said we've gotten probably 6 inches of rain plus over the last 3 to 4 weeks, whatever it is, I bet I could dig down far enough right now to find kind of semi-dry pockets where it's still kind of dry out here from that. How close to the corner of a house can they plant an Empress of China dogwood? Probably 4 feet off if you're putting it at that kind of 45-degree angle off the corner of the house, then you maybe 4 feet. If it's directly in front of the house or beside, you know, off the edge, you might want to go a hair further than that. But 4 to 5 feet. So somebody said Burms. how do you make one? What are they for? Are they man-made or natural, and what is the purpose of them? So I guess they're talking about just things planted in berms. I see a lot of new subdivisions where they scrape off everybody's topsoil and down to the subsoil and build berms around it so that they can gain height, you know, to block the view of directly into the houses. But it's just, they're just made of some sort of topsoil, you know, scraped to make them. And the purpose of most of the time with berms is to gain some height or some sound. You know, these plants aren't very good at blocking sound. I get consultation questions a lot where it's like, what plants can I use to stop the sound? We live right on the road. That plants are terrible at stopping sound. It just takes a lot. You can hear in these videos the train and all the other things around. The train's not that close. There's a lot of trees between me and that train, and they just don't do a very good job of actually buffering sound. Solid objects do. Fences, concrete, berms, soil berms. You know, that's why amphitheaters are soil mounds, basically, so the sound from the band just travels into the earth rather than, you know, going straight out of that space. So earthen things like that block sound, and so that's one purpose for them. And then you can just get height out of your shrubs. I can go buy 3-gallon shrubs that are only this big if I can build a 3.5 to 4 foot berm, you know, to put them on. Now I have 7-foot tall shrubs, so that's another purpose. They are much harder to water, you know, so you have to think about if you're raising plants up above the grade that, you know, they're going to dry out much faster than surrounding things. So you want to put tough things up on top of berms. But those are some reasons, you know, a person would use berms, probably others as well that I'm not popping into my mind right this second. Let's see, last question for this week, and Holly has made it through the whole video laying here. Somebody just asking, they want a video on plants for fall and winter pollination. We'll definitely make that video later in the fall. And this is another thing that I pointed out in the weekly garden planner, and I want to continue to have people think about moving forward, is our gardens have become really good places where people are thinking about pollinators, and they're thinking about all the flowering things during the summertime, and then they're thinking about the things that the caterpillars use, or the butterflies use, like like milkweed, fennel, some of those kinds of things. We also then have to think about the third part of the equation is having fall blooming perennials. They're extremely important for the migration of these things to get back wherever they came from. And so we tend to have very flowery spring gardens, very flowery summer gardens, and then they just collapse for the fall. So I do want that out in the world. It's just like there's a very large group of plants that bloom in the fall. Lots of them bloom yellow. You'll notice there's a ton of yellow flowering things along the highways and other places during the fall months. A lot of them are hard to identify because they're all yellow from one another. But that period of time is super, super important for pollinators, you know, that are migrating back and forth in some way, to make sure that those, we basically build a bridge for them to get back wherever they're going. So there you go. Thank you guys very much. Again, the $50 discount on the Learn to Garden video series will be for the month of August if you're interested in it. And there's 3 videos going up on it during the month of August, and 2 more months on the weekly garden planner are going up as well. But both of those discounts are down below this video. Thanks for watching.